So many years ago, John McCain, long before he was a presidential candidate or a senator or any of those things, was a prisoner of war. And he relates this story in his book, The Faith of My Fathers. It says, after being in solitary confinement for a while, I was overwhelmed by the compulsion to talk nonstop, face-to-face with my obliging new cellmate. They'd brought him out of solitary back into where there were other folks there. He said, I ran my mouth ceaselessly for 4 days. One of the more amusing spectacles in prison is the sight of two men, both just released from solitary, talking their heads off simultaneously, neither one listening to the other, both absolutely enraptured by the sounds of their voices. When you've been alone for a while and you encounter people again, there is just something there. I remember vividly the first time I took a youth group to Colorado to hike on a mountain. I was not in mountain hiking condition that year. I was the driver. I don't know if I've ever been mountain hiking condition, but I definitely wasn't that year. And I was the driver. There was another dad that went along with us, Rick Short, a really nice guy. He sells, of all things, you'll appreciate this being in Oklahoma, he sells supplements for cows' food that allows there to be less flies around the cows. I don't know how all that works. He does. He can explain it all to you. But he travels all over the country selling these supplements for cow food. And he went with 5 teenage guys onto the mountain. So if you can imagine what that experience would be like for him. He's used to being around cows and people who are around cows, and here he is with these 5 teenage guys, and they're climbing the mountain. And I remember when I went to pick them up from the bottom of the mountain, he was so excited to talk to a grown-up again. And he had talked to the teenagers for a while. He had talked to some college students that served as guides, and they all got along great. But he was happy to see a familiar face and kind of go through the time there. And I will tell you that probably in that next day, I heard Rick Short talk more than I'd ever heard Rick Short talk before. He's kind of a quiet guy, always wore a cowboy hat, and he just talked my ear off for quite a while. And it was great. I loved hearing about it. And I thought of that when I thought of this from McCain, this idea of when you're alone for a while, to be around people again, there's just something that is there. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it's hardwired within us because, to begin with, God exists in community. Okay, that's the God we will find in Genesis 1. And I don't know if we think about him in those terms all the time. I know when we get into theology and all that stuff, we think of the Trinity. Even though we don't talk about the Trinity a lot, we probably sing about that more than anything. But we understand that God is not alone. God exists within community. So at the very beginning, in Genesis 1, you see that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And we almost lose that in the midst of the verse, but we're introduced to God that we kind of assume to be the Father at the beginning of all this. And then we find the Spirit hovering. And then John in the New Testament tells us a little more of what happened. He says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And down in verse 14, he says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So we learn between the first couple verses of the book of Genesis and the first few verses of the book of John that all the way back there in the beginning, you have the Father and the Spirit and the Son. By the way, a little out of order of how we usually say it. But I think we could probably also learn from the idea of the Trinity that they're all these persons within the Trinity. They're all an important piece of what's going on there. And so you have the Father and the Spirit and the Son all there together. And so then down at the end of chapter 1, he says, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So now we have us and our. Okay, so we have the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, and now we're talking in terms of us and our. So there is this togetherness that is here. There's a connection of some kind. And so people have tried from the point we understood there's a Father, Son, and Spirit early on in Scripture until today to explain how this works. And I will tell you, I've heard 100 analogies trying to explain how the Trinity works and how everything interacts and all of that, and all of them fall apart at some level because it is just unlike anything else. But one thing we can definitively see in it is that there is a connection with them. There's this community there where they do not exist individually. They're part of this group. They are part of something that is always together. And I believe also that people are designed to exist in community. Just as God is, people are too. So if we go further down into the Genesis story, we find this in chapter 2. says, "The Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." So we see here it's not good. All the way through chapter 1, we have things that are good. God makes something, it's good. God makes another thing, it's good. It's morning and evening and then the next day. And God makes something and it's good. And then he gets down to man and it's very good. There's this great thing that is going on in creation. And then in chapter 2, we find the first thing that's not good, loneliness. And if you have been there, I think you can connect here. Maybe on a level that people that don't feel lonely can't quite get their heads around. It is not good to be alone, which again is why God has created us in such a way that we're not intended to be alone. And I'm not just talking about marriage, as we're going to see that kind of develop here, but more than that, that as people, we are designed to live life with other people. We're designed not to do this on our own. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So these two individuals now become one flesh or one family. And so we have this new family unit that is formed. And in our physical world, this is the source of a lot of joy and a lot of tension, isn't it? Because on the joyful side, you have this person that you walk through life with. If you're the parents and it's your kids, and we've watched this unfold several times in wedding showers over the last couple weeks already, that there are these new family units that are going to be formed. And then at some point, you will have some level of tension now between these two family units that are learning how to get along with one another. Because mom and dad have always had a way of doing things. And now there is this new husband and wife, and they're going to come from one of them comes from another family, has another way of doing things. And all these things have to start to meld together, which is, I believe, at least a piece of why we see so much church family kind of language. Because all of us have come here from somewhere. Now, some of you have been at Southwest for your entire lives, which is kind of cool. And you can look back through the generations and see that. A lot of you have come from somewhere else. And you have everything of the other church families you have come from that you bring here, and you think, well, Southwest does this thing weird. This is not how things are supposed to happen. Or Southwest does this thing exactly the way it should be done. Or maybe sometimes you run across something and think, I wish we would have thought of that back where I was, and we could have done it that way there, and I've learned something here. These two individuals, although they don't have a lot of history coming in, Adam has a little more, but that's about it, they're going to become one family. Now, we also learn in the New Testament that Jesus values community. So you see a God that exists in community. He has designed his people to want community, to thrive in community. And then you see that Jesus values community. Now, if you were to look at Mark's gospel, which we did here on Sunday mornings a couple years back, if you were in Jeff's class, you just finished doing that not long ago, Mark's gospel kind of jumps right in. There's not the genealogy and all the birth narratives and all that stuff. He jumps right into the story. And it says in verse 17 of the first chapter, that Jesus said to them, he's run across these fishermen here. He says to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." So in the first 17 verses of the book of Mark, what we see is there is an announcement that Jesus is coming. John the Baptist shows up, explains what's going to happen. Then there is Jesus' baptism. So this thing that we do as we follow him, he does it as an example for us. Then he goes out in the wilderness and he's tempted. And Mark doesn't say a lot about it, but he says a little bit about that happening. And then all of a sudden, he's choosing people. So when I look at that, I think to myself, why 17 verses in are we already here? And it's because Jesus sees the value of community. So much so that when he comes to earth to be God with us, as we talked about in Matthew for the last several weeks, as he is with us, his way of doing that is to choose people to walk alongside. So he gets all these people and he takes on community. But we learn something else down in chapter 3. This crowd comes in. They're starting to see what he does. They want to hear the teaching. They want to experience the healing. And down in verse 9, he says, it said that he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him, for he had healed many, so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. So for him, it's not just about numbers. Because now he has a ton of community, doesn't he? He has all these people that are gathered around, but he doesn't just want that. And that, by the way, is kind of our struggle within church life, isn't it? I get up here and I stand and I think to myself, okay, The youth group is not here because they're in Tecumseh, and there's a reason for that. But there's also a gap right here, and I don't know what this is about. I know I've seen pictures of people at the lake. I figure that's part of it. I know there's families that are usually here. I know some's on vacation. I know there are things that are going on, and I will leave where I stand before you. We'll have an invitation in just a few minutes. I'll walk back there. I'll get a drink of water because I need it desperately after talking all this time. And then I will look at the board, and the board will tell me how many people were here. And sometimes I like that number, and sometimes I don't, because I get caught up in the crowds too at times. And we get so much about that we forget, yes, it's nice to have a lot of people, but that's not what church is about completely. It's not just about the numbers, because later here in chapter 3 it says this: he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he desired, and they came to him. It's not just the numbers. He calls these other people to him because it's about depth. And I believe in churches, this is the place where we suffer the most. Now, there are those among us that have very deep relationships with one another. And there are those among us where it is very peripheral and very shallow. And some of that is nature. Some of that is just kind of how things happen. You probably have that, for those of you who still work, you probably have that at work. In your neighborhoods, for those of you who live in a neighborhood, you probably have that in your neighborhood. If you're like Rick Short with the cows, you probably have that, one cow's a little closer than the others. I don't want to talk about that. But you have this depth here within church. How do we get to that depth? That's not easy to do. And honestly, the only way to get there is time. Jesus chooses these people. The crowds begin to follow, but then he gets this core of 12 who are really going to follow closely. And they're going to have intimate conversations. They're going to talk about the important things of life and God and Scripture and all of that. But we even learn more than that about Jesus, that even at 12, it's tough. Even to fully have that connection with 12, it's difficult. And so he has these few that are involved in the really big deal kind of times. And for us as a church, we have that too, and that's natural. There will be people here that you have a much deeper connection with to others. But the challenge for us is that all of us need to have a deep connection with somebody. All of us need to have people here that we are connecting with at a level that goes deeper than just, hi, how you doing? That goes deeper than just seeing a face, than knowing a few stories of what's going on, that goes to a deep life kind of level. Jesus wants us to have that same kind of community. I think he did it because it made sense for what he was doing in this walk in life. I think he did it because he knew there would be a time where he would leave this life and there would need to be other people who knew enough, understood enough, had been close enough that they could carry it on. But more than that, I think he did it as an example for you and me, that we would understand if he can't do this on his own, and I don't want to get in the can't, didn't debate. That's not the point of this. If he decided not to do this on his own, then why do we think we can't? Well, why on earth would I think, I got this so much, I've got it all figured out, I know Scripture so well, I know all the right answers, that I don't need your help. I don't need your encouragement, I don't need your rebuke, I don't need your correction, I don't need you to laugh with me, to cry with me, whatever it may be. I can handle all this on my own. Because we see no example like that in Jesus. At every turn, Jesus brings people alongside. But if you don't believe just by example, hear his words in John 17. He has this prayer to the Father, and he says this: I do not ask only for these, the disciples there that he was praying for, but also for those who will believe in me through their word. Who's going to believe through their word? Well, that's us. That they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you have loved me. He wants us to be perfectly one. I love that language. I know we talk unity a lot. I know we talk getting along and all those kinds of things. But what Jesus wants us to be is perfectly one, unified in everything. That we are on the same page, that we are involved in one another's lives, that we are a family together. So the many become one family. Think back to Genesis, the two become one. Now we have the many, the all of us, and we become one family. I was sitting at lunch with Jet a week or two ago now, and Jet was explaining something about rodeo to me. And in a moment in there, I thought to myself, I really feel for this man as he's trying to explain this to me, because I have no clue what he's talking about. And he used a term for a little while through there. I won't get into it, but he used a term for a little while through there. And I think he realized somewhere into the conversation I had no idea what that meant. And finally he said, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "No." And then he explained to me what that thing was. And it was funny. I had a picture in my mind of what he was talking about, and it was absolutely nothing like what he was talking about. And then he explained to me. And I thought, I enjoy conversation with Jet. He'll teach something in class. I will always be holding back one comment because I don't want to get him off track. And then afterwards, I'll tell him that one comment. And then usually it will devolve into a phone call on Thursday morning where we talk for like a half hour about whatever that was. I love those conversations. There is nothing else on earth that would have ever brought Jet and I together other than this. What would it be? And I look around the room and I see so much of that. I see people who were coaches and teachers and farmers and accountants and all kinds of different things. What else would bring this group together here in this place, doing life together in the way that we're doing it? I believe it's the answer, the response to the prayer of Jesus in John 17. We are many coming together as one family. And family, they're not just peripherally involved, are they? There may be times where you wish they were, but they're not. They're heavily involved in life. And for us, we are called to the same thing. The church is our community, and I don't want to confuse us too much because we're going to talk about our actual community next week. But the church is our community in the sense that God exists in community, Jesus exists in community. They want community for us, but it's also our family. And family we get. We understand how important family is. We understand the value of family. We understand what family brings to us, and we probably understand some of the negative side of family as well. Church is our family. In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul writes about it this way: "I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called." So it's this calling that brings us together. "With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." So this unity, this perfected oneness that Jesus prayed for, Paul continues asking that of us. "There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift." So the many become one family. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. It's all one coming out of the many. We are many becoming one. He'll also say this in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, accountants or cowboys, teachers or coaches, preachers, homemakers, whatever you may do. All were made to drink of one Spirit. So it is with Christ," as he says in verse 12. "As Jesus is one," as Jesus is one that exists as part of three. And again, try to explain that, and it's hard. We are many who have become one. We are one body, one family. We are one. So why does being one family matter? We'll draw it all together here. Why is this important? I get the fact that if there are 200 or 300 of us, that when we are unified, when we're all kind of in the same place, that this works better. I get the fact that if there is a big disagreement, that's a challenge and we don't quite know what to do with that. I heard a story about a church that was hiring a preacher, and they brought in 3 guys to do the tryout. Which, by the way, you never have understood until you've been on the wrong side of this thing, how hard it is to go in front of this group of people and to try to win them over in a weekend. And you have all these forces going on within you of, do I preach the best thing I've ever preached? Do I preach something that's average so they won't get their hopes up too much? What do I do? These 3 guys come in. They're 3 very different guys. And I'm not one, by the way. This is not a personal thing. These 3 guys come in. And they, after the three guys have been there, they hand out questionnaires to the members and ask them what they thought and all of this stuff. And then they ask them to rank the three guys. I'm sure there's a Bible example of this, but I sure haven't found it. Anyhow, they ask them to rank these three guys, and they get all the questionnaires back, and they have an accountant tabulate all these things. And you know what they find out? It's exactly thirds. 1/3 of the church thinks one guy is the best. Another third of the church thinks the second guy is the best. Another third thinks the third guy is the best. And all of the elders have to sit around a room and say, now what? What do we do? What do we do with that? Do we pick one? Do we cast lots? Do we know how to cast lots? What do we do? And there's this confusion that goes. So being one matters in that sense. But not just because as a church we are better, because we're able to function better, but I believe being one does a lot of things for us individually too, as we are part of that one. First of all, there is power in family. When we are one, when we are a unified family, there is power to be found there. As Jared read to us as we started, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fail, or if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. I am not an engineer, but I love watching those shows on TV that explain to you how things work and how things are made. I watched one about suspension bridges one time, and I wish I would have never watched it. Because those cables are actually what holds the bridge up. And then they show you close-ups of the cables. And what it is lots of little strands that are all wrapped around one another that create something that is big and strong together. And the theory is, if one of those little cables snaps, it'll be okay because they put too many in there on purpose. If two of them snaps, you're probably still good. At some point, there's going to be too many. And they build it this way for that purpose. If you've ever been to Gatlinburg, I don't know if you've been there, they have that big cable car thing that you can go up the mountain in. My mom went there one time when I was a kid, and she came back and told me this story, that when they got on there, they were about halfway across when someone came on the PA to announce to them how the cables work and how frequently they replace the cables. And then told them, these people who are trapped halfway between valley and mountain, that this was the last ride before the periodic cable replacement. They were not nearly as excited about that ride as when they got on. Everyone tensed up a little bit. I thought, why would you do that to these people? All those little strands matter because when they're put together, it is stronger. If you think it is difficult to walk in this world as a Christian, which I think you would probably acknowledge, if you're walking alongside someone and someone else is walking alongside them and someone comes in on the other side and suddenly it is a group of you who are going through this thing together, it is very different than doing this by yourself. And if you ever think to yourself, God, this is too hard to do alone, if God would verbally answer you, I think he would say, yes, it is. That's why I didn't design it that way. I never intended for you to do this alone. There is one guy who did this alone, and he had the power to rise from the dead. And he only did it alone very briefly when everybody left. The rest of the time, even he is together. So there's power in being together. Secondly, there is growth in family. We can grow to an extent on our own, but when we come together, we grow in a much different kind of way. Proverbs 27:17 says this, iron sharpens iron and one man sharpens another. How many times can you look back on your Christian walk and think of how someone has helped you to think of, see something, understand something differently than you did before? It happens to me all the time, where someone will give me an idea I haven't thought of, where someone will call me out on something that I've done and help me to realize I need to grow in the midst of that. I need to be different. And when you're on your own, that's difficult to do. If you're like me, I remember learning math when I was a kid, and occasionally I would have a teacher who would say, go home and read this introductory section on this thing in algebra, and then do these problems. And I would think, why? Why are you doing this to me? Because what I need is for you to explain to me what it is, do 2 or 3 of them on the board, and then I've got it. But when I go read something and try to get it, I have no idea, especially with math. When we are alongside each other, teaching, helping, we can grow better than we could otherwise. Third, there is encouragement in family. And if you have not found this, You may be hanging around the wrong family people. I don't know. We're not all naturally encouraging. We all need to be better. I get that. Or maybe you're being this for somebody else. But there's something about being with family that encourages us along. Paul says this in 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up just as you are doing. I like that he tells them to do this thing, and by the way, you're already doing it. Just keep doing it. And so for those of you who are encouraging, keep on encouraging. For those of you who find someone encouraging, let them know how encouraging they are. And strive to be an encourager for somebody else. And then fourth, there is love in family. And love looks like a whole lot of different things for us. I think Paul describes it well in Romans 12 when he says, love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. What if that was what the church family was? We're not just going to love, we're going to try to outdo one another in how we're doing that. If I have been loved by someone here who is a part of this church, it's almost like a love competition now. I've got to love even more than I've been loved. If that is the one that we've become, people will want to be here and be a part of things. So where are you in this today? I would imagine there are some among us that feel very, very connected. I think of some of the open spaces we have here. The ones that we can't explain, there may be some of these folks, wherever they may be sitting around, that get a call before the day is over, or before the week is over, saying, missed you today, or a text. I guess we don't call anybody anymore. They get some kind of communication. Missed you today. Or maybe you have gotten that, and you have had someone call and say, hey, we haven't seen you lately. Wonder where you've been. How are things going? Or more than that, are we connecting on a level that goes beyond just attendance? Because again, it's hard for us to let go of just attendance, but it's more than that. It's about that depth of relationship. And if you don't feel that connection of depth, that's a two-way street. I hope none of us will be the people who sit back and say, nobody at that church ever talks to me. For one, if nobody here ever talks to you, I struggle not thinking you're not making an effort for that. Because it's hard to get out of here and not be talked to. But if you're not, could you talk to somebody else? Could you maybe be the one who starts that a little bit? And then could the conversation grow deeper? Could we talk about life and struggle and joy and celebration and all of those things as if we are one family? Or if you are trying to go through life on your own and you desperately need this is who we want to be. We're not always great at it. That's why we're talking about it today. We mess up at it sometimes, but we want to be people who are connected, who know about each other, who are involved in each other's lives, and who are helping and encouraging one another to grow closer to God. If that sounds like something that you would like to be a part of, you can be baptized into Him, that one baptism this morning. You can begin a new walk, and we can walk alongside one another in a stronger way than walking alone. Or if you need to come back to Him, you can do that and be part of this family again. If there's something we can do for you, please come while we stand and sing.